Gotham Knights was released October 21st, 2022 for the PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and the PC. This is a review of Gotham Knights played on the PlayStation 5, and this game's about a year old, so there's been new stuff added. But the game starts with a big cinematic opening with Batman taking on Ra's al Ghul in the Batcave. And also, Batman meets his demise in this opening cutscene as well, because Batman decides to voluntarily detonate the Batwing, as a result destroying the Batcave and everything within it in his battle against Ra's al Ghul. Following this, the four members of the Bat family then investigate the rubble that's left behind and eventually find Batman's body. Following this, there's a funeral scene in which we're introduced to two characters who will play a part in the story a little bit later, Catherine Kane, who is the Commissioner of the GCPD, and Jacob Kane, who is the Mayor of Gotham City. Then we are introduced to our four playable characters, Batgirl, Robin, Nightwing, and Red Hood, and it's up to them to maintain the order in Gotham City in amidst to crime rate spiking due to Batman's absence. Up first is graphics, and of course I don't consider graphics to be that important, but Gotham Knights is a very beautiful game. Now I understand that I'm quite biased because I really love landscapes, I love cities, I love big neon-filled city lights, and this game is absolutely full of this stuff, and I'm really liking this a lot, particularly when it's raining and you can see the puddles building up on the roads. It's just absolutely beautiful. This game features great looking interiors as well, like this Court of Owls building that Nightwing is infiltrating, and then there's also the Harley Quinn interiors, which are beautifully molded. As I said, lights, particularly neon lights, are very visually appealing to me. So this interior, this Harley Quinn one, is beautiful. And speaking of my own little biases, fabrics. Whenever you glide in this game, as Batgirl, you can see the fabric of her cape, and you can see kind of how the water reacts to it. It's really nice to look at. This is my bias, though. In terms of character models, for the most part, they look sufficient enough. I mean, as I said, though, I don't consider graphics to be that important in terms of video games, but the character models, whenever you're out in the city, they look fine. It accomplishes its goal. They're nothing too spectacular. But what I do consider most important is gameplay, and I think Gotham Knights is lacking in certain areas. This game has four playable characters, and we're going to go into each of them individually. Nightwing is a character that lacks a lot of skills from long range, but when it comes to being up close and personal, Nightwing is very good at that. He also tends to be quite strong in terms of crowd control too. A lot of his special abilities that he has is just designed to hit as many enemies as he possibly can. Nightwing is a very good character if you like to get up close and personal. But if you prefer to be more balanced, then Robin is definitely the way to go. Robin doesn't have as strong close attacks as some of the other characters do, but Robin absolutely excels when it comes to stealth. That's arguably Robin's strongest area. Robin also is pretty decent from long-range attacks too. I didn't play as Robin that much. I played as Batgirl more so than anybody else. But Robin is fantastic when it comes to stealth. And the reason why is because Robin has an ability, it's also his transport ability that he unlocks upon knighthood, that allows him to teleport right behind an enemy and then teleport away instantly. He's a great choice to go to for stealth. But if you'd like to go in absolutely guns blazing, Red Hood is a fantastic choice. Red Hood is not really great at close-range combat, but he absolutely excels from long range because Red Hood has guns, which is Red Hood's whole character in the comics, admittedly. Red Hood isn't known for taking a stealth approach to many options. He just goes in absolutely guns blazing, so if stealth doesn't interest you that much, Red Hood is a very fine choice to go with. But the character that I played more than anybody else was Batgirl. Batgirl plays more similarly to Batman in the Arkham games than anybody else, and I know it's not necessarily fair to compare this to Arkham, but Batgirl is a very balanced character. She's good from long range and she's good from close range, but she isn't great at anything. For stealth, she can hack cameras and disable them, which do make the stealth sections easier, but really when it comes to stealth, that's one factor this game really lacks in. Following the destruction of the Batcave, all the members of the Bat family make their quarters, or rather headquarters, the base of operations, the Belfry. And the Belfry allows you to switch between any of the four characters whenever you want, as long as you're at the Belfry. You cannot switch out when you're on parole, or patrol, as this game calls it. Now, this game has a shared progression system where all four characters will be able to level up all at the same time. So if you level up to level 12 as Nightwing, everybody else also simultaneously levels up, regardless of if you play as them or not. This is one of the biggest strengths of Gotham Knights because this allows you to play as whoever you want without worrying about one character becoming too overpowered and being able to outpace the others. This is also designed for the co-op portions of this game because this does feature online co-op where you can play at the same time with some of your friends. However, I think this also does hold the game back a little bit. So if you earn 4 skill points with Nightwing, you also have 4 skill points for everybody else. And these skill points are not shared, so this allows you to balance the progression for each character. However, the way that this game is designed, you can accomplish everything with every character. You don't have to switch at all if you don't want to, and I think that does really hold this game back in some instances. Even though each of the 4 characters has one area that they're really strong in, it doesn't really matter in the long run who you play as. Batgirl is a very balanced character. Red Hood excels at long range, Nightwing excels from close range, and Robin excels at stealth. But it doesn't really matter who you play as, and every character can fight exactly the same way, despite having little areas of strength. So it doesn't matter who you play as, because everybody plays more or less the same, just with, oh, this character it's slightly easier for them to do this. So there's really no incentive to switch characters whatsoever. In terms of navigation, you can use the grapple to get around the buildings and the tops of the train tracks and street lamps and all that stuff. It's very similar to Spider-Man, like how the web zip mechanic works, but it's pretty slow. But this game does have a bat cycle, which typically tends to be the most efficient and most effective way of traveling. There's also a little bit of bat cycle combat, which reminds me a lot of Spider-Man. I should stop with the comparisons though. There are even some sections where there is combat with the bat cycle, but it's very useful for getting across bridges. Since the open world is basically just like 4 islands, you're going to have to cross some bridges, and it's easier to do it on the bat cycle, more so than any other mode of navigation, except if you're Nightwing. But each character does have their own unique mode of navigation. Batgirl can glide, which is a lot different than it is in the Arkham games, because you can dive bomb, which is called a nosedive, and you can pull out of it, but you can't sustain a glide that much. For Robin, he can actually teleport over short distances, as you can see here. It's very, very useful for stealth, but in terms of general navigation, it's not great. For Robin, it's better to just continue using the bat cycle. This does give Robin a huge advantage in stealth, though, because you can use it to get away from enemies, or you can use it to sneak up behind an enemy, but he has to be in the air to activate it. For Red Hood, the character I played as the least, his navigation is like this momentum jump system, which I couldn't master it. I'm not sure if it's just the timing or what, but it's not that useful. You're better off just using the bat cycle. But in terms of navigation, the absolute best character is Nightwing. Nightwing can summon this drone out of mid-air, and he can fly with this thing. He can hold on to it for as long as he wants. He can increase and decrease the altitude. Nightwing can fly with this. So it's definitely the best in terms of navigation. This game also does feature a good amount of customization. If you defeat enemies, they'll drop items that you can use to craft suits and even weapon upgrades as well as suit upgrades. These are pretty cool, and they do give you a vast array of suits to wear for each of the characters, but these also do affect your stats. So you might have to wear a suit you're not a big fan of, but it does make you a little bit stronger, so it's worth it. And you can also customize the bat cycle, which is really nothing more than just you changing what color there is. But in terms of story, this game has a big conflict between the Court of Owls and the League of Assassins, with Talia trying to, I guess, become the new head of the League of Assassins. Like you rotating pieces of a statue to make an owl shadow, which is kind of like Resident Evil, like the shadow puzzles. But sometimes you walk up to a lab or some sort of area, and there will be 1 or 2 things that you can look at, and you have to try to guess, this happened because of this. There also are options to skip puzzles in this game, which is fine, I guess, but there's not a lot of diversity in the puzzles. It's just more of like, match these 2 things together, and that's about it. There was even like a Sudoku puzzle at one point in this game, which was actually the most enjoyable of the puzzles. There's also these chests lying around, which is a little strange, that there's like this big giant chest full of craftable materials that you can just have lying around in the middle of like the iceberg lounge with Penguin. But nevertheless, in this game, you just infiltrate the Court of Owls after you learn that they do, in fact, exist. It was a big mystery in Gotham for years. And there's also a big battle between the League of Assassins and the Court of Owls. And sometimes this stuff gets absolutely absurd. Like the Court of Owls having a gas that makes you hallucinate your biggest fears sounds very, very familiar to a villain who isn't in this game. And then sometimes you even visit old familiar locations, such as Arkham Asylum. However, when you get to Arkham Asylum, some pretty interesting things happen, like you fighting Man-Bat. Or Man-Bats, because there's multiple. There isn't just one in this game. We also have references to other DC characters, such as Tatsuya Mashiro, who is Katana in the comics, and even Black Canary, who is Dinah Lance in this game. And I love the references to other DC characters, particularly Black Canary. We're going back to Injustice 2 now when it comes to Black Canary. This game also does include a handful of side missions that are referred to as villain case files. There are 3, one for Clayface, one for Harley Quinn, and one for Mr. Freeze. These missions are basically just you going to a location, fighting a bunch of bad guys, and then you even get to fight the bosses themselves. So you get to fight Clayface here, or I guess multiple Clayfaces, because he has the ability to break himself apart and form new Clayfaces. But in a later mission, you also do get to fight him again, and these Clayface boss fights are really, really interesting. Not as good as the Arkham City Clayface boss fights, but in the final part you even bring him to a hot and dry area like this furnace where he actually solidifies and you can break him. So this Clayface boss fight is really cool. Now getting into Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn has some very beautifully designed interiors, as I mentioned earlier. But also, let me tell you about how much I love this Harley Quinn design in this game. This game features one of my absolute favorite Harley Quinn designs. But for the most part, it's you go to this location, beat up these bad guys, watch a cutscene, and then you get to fight the boss themselves, which I think is very, very interesting. So Harley Quinn's was probably my favorite of the 3, and then we get into some of the Mr. Freeze stuff. In the story for this game, Mr. Freeze was working with an enemy faction as the Regulators by giving them the freeze weapons. For the Mr. Freeze sections, it's more or less the same, fight enemies and then fight the boss. But at one point they introduced Mecha Freeze, which is a level of absurdity I haven't seen in a while. With something like this, I thought Godzilla was about to show up. But I mean, it's pretty cool, he's in a giant robot. Once you're in the open world, outside of stories, there are premeditated crimes, which are basically just kind of side activities you can do where you stop enemies and you can even interrogate them and ask them where the other locations where the premeditated crimes are. You do need to complete some of the premeditated crimes to advance in the story in some instances, and then there are regular crimes, which show up as white triangles on the map. These are basically just, hey, these bad guys have spawned over here, you can beat them up if you want. There are time trials of the Bat Cycle and stuff like that, and there are a ton of collectibles. But there's really not much in the open world that could keep you entertained. Maybe just like some of the collectibles, like the secret cache, but that's about it. Overall, I don't think Gotham Knights is as bad of a game as some people were painting it to be. Maybe this is because the game was improved through later updates. I played the most up-to-date version of the game. But there are a few things about this game that I just don't particularly like. I think some of the dialogue is shoddily written. I think the ending isn't great. I mean, I don't want to explain what it is for spoiler purposes, but it just feels like a very sellout ending. But I do think that this game is really fun. It was very interesting, and I had a lot of fun with it. I didn't care much for the open world stuff. The crimes are fine, but fighting the enemies get boring after a while. And the lack of incentive to play as basically anybody else. You can switch characters if you want. You can stick with the same one, but the game doesn't incentivize you to switch at all. It's just like, yeah, you can switch if you want. I don't know, I just thought the game would have been much more interesting, in my opinion, if you had some sort of an incentive to switch characters. But as I said, I don't think this game is as bad as people like to paint it out to be. Gotham Knights is overall a pretty decent game. I think I'm going to be giving this a 7 out of 10. I don't think it's that bad. I had a lot of fun with it, but there are some things I just do not like about it.